Wyoming Territory, July 1879. The train whistled long and low through the dry wind as it pulled away from the Rawlins depot, leaving behind a single woman in a pale blue dress. Her gloved hands clenched around a sun-bleached valise, and her heart hammering like it might split in two. Verity Jameson had been waiting on that wooden bench since sunup. The conductor had closed the door with a nod and no apology, and now the train was a line of smoke curling into the wide prairie sky. She stood alone, dust gathering at the hem of her wedding skirt, the lace veil she had worn tucked into her satchel like a foolish dream. He had said he would be there. Verity's eyes burned, but she did not cry. Not here, not where the freight men and the station master could see. She had come all the way from Illinois with a letter in her pocket and a promise stitched into her chest. Vernon Pike, the cowboy who had once written her every week for 2 years from a cattle run near Laramie, had asked her to marry him in the spring. The ring had arrived in a box wrapped in oilskin. His last letter had said, "Come July, I will be there, I swear it." But the train had come and gone, and there had been no sign of him. A wagon clattered past on the road behind her, stirring dust and dried grass. Someone laughed from inside the depot. She sat back down, hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl, and stared at the horizon. "He is not coming, is he?" she said aloud, not to anyone in particular. "You look like someone got left at the altar," a voice answered. She turned her head fast. A tall man leaned against the post of the depot, his hat tilted back, copper blonde hair curling against his collar. His boots were worn, his shirt sun-bleached and rolled to the elbows. He had a scar beneath his left eye and a look in his gaze that said he had known disappointment too. "I did not have an altar," Verity answered, her throat tight. "Still," he said, stepping off the post, "you fit the picture. Pretty dress, eyes full of questions." She stood. "Did you see him? He is tall, wears a gray hat with a pheasant feather, Vernon Pike." He was supposed to meet this train. The man's face shifted. Not surprise exactly, something else. He took off his hat. "Name's Vale Preston. I know Vernon. Worked a cattle drive with him 2 springs ago," her heart caught. "Is he here? Is he in town?" Vale hesitated. "No, miss. He left Rawlins almost 3 weeks back. Headed south toward the Wind River Range. Said he had to clear something up with a partner, but he never said anything about a bride waiting at the depot." Verity felt like the ground had tilted. "He asked me to come," she said quietly. "He sent a ring." "Letters?" Vale looked at her hands. "You still got those letters?" She reached into her satchel and pulled one out. He took it gently, reading the looping script. His frown deepened. "This is Vernon's writing, sure enough, but I reckon he never planned to be here." Verity sat down again hard. She pressed her lips together. "I left everything," she whispered. "My father died last winter. My job at the school ended after the spring term. I had nothing left where I was. He said we would marry here." Vale crouched in front of her. "You want the truth?" She nodded. "I think he ran. I think he got scared or stupid or just plain selfish. But I do not think he meant to hurt you. You do not even know me." "I know what it looks like when someone gets left behind," he said, standing. "Come on. You cannot sit here all night long. I do not have anywhere else to go." "Then you will come with me," she blinked. "I have a little cabin just outside of town. My sister's boy is staying with me for the summer. We got extra room. You can stay until you figure things out." "I do not even know you," she said again. Vale smiled gently. "Then let us fix that." She hesitated, then stood. Her valise felt heavier than it had that morning. He took it from her without asking. They walked down the dirt road together, the town behind them turning gold in the lowering sun. The cabin was small but tidy. A porch with 2 chairs, smoke curling from the chimney. Inside, a boy of about 10 looked up from a game of dominoes at the table. "Verity, this is Jasper," Vale said. "My nephew." "Jasper, this is Miss Jameson. She is staying with us for a few days." Jasper grinned, all freckles and missing teeth. "Are you a school teacher?" Verity managed a small smile. "I was." "She is from Illinois," Vale added, setting her valise down. "And she likes books more than horses." "Books are boring," Jasper said. "Only if you are reading the wrong ones," Verity replied. Jasper tilted his head. "Maybe you can read me one tonight." She glanced at Vale. He nodded. After supper, Vale lit the lamp and Verity helped wash dishes. She had not said much, but he did not press. When Jasper had gone to bed and the cabin was quiet, he poured her a cup of tea and brought it to the porch. She sat in the rocker, the stars just beginning to show. "I am sorry," he said. "About today," she took the cup. "You did not do it." "No. But it does not mean I cannot be sorry." She looked at his hands. They were rough, calloused, steady. "Why are you looking after me?" she asked. "Because someone should." "That is not an answer." He sat beside her. 3 years ago, I asked a girl to marry me. We had plans. I went north to work a winter run. When I came back, she was gone, married someone else, left nothing but a note. I know what it feels like. Verity looked at him. "What did the note say?" "I could not wait forever." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I would have waited forever." He did not even wait until I got off the train. Vale's jaw clenched. "Then he was a fool." She looked away, eyes shining. "I do not know what to do now. You do not have to know tonight." He stood and offered his hand. "Come morning, things might feel different." She took his hand. And for the first time since the train left, she let herself breathe. Morning came slow and quiet, with pale light filtering through the shutters, and the scent of coffee and wood smoke drifting into the room where Verity had slept. The ticking of a mantel clock marked the only sound in the hush, steady and expectant. She lay still for a few moments, staring at the raw pine ceiling. Her fingers curled around the quilt Vale's sister must have sewn long before her boy came to stay. When she rose, the dress she had worn the day before hung on a peg by the door, brushed clean and neatly smoothed. A blouse and skirt, simpler and more suited for chores, were folded by the wash basin. She dressed without fuss, twisting her hair into a loose knot. Her boots, though dusty, held firm. The kitchen was warm when she entered. Jasper sat cross-legged on the floor beside the hearth, carving a piece of driftwood with a small jackknife. Vale stood by the stove, a dish towel slung over his shoulder as he stirred something in a cast iron pot. "You cook?" Verity asked, stepping inside. "Not well," he replied, "but no one's keeled over yet." Jasper looked up. "He burned the corn mush last week. Whole place smelled like wagon grease." Vale gave him a look. "You want breakfast or not?" Verity leaned against the table, watching. "I can help." Vale glanced at her, then nodded toward the cupboard. "Biscuits are there, if you don't mind setting the table." She moved without hesitation, hands steady on the tin plates and mismatched forks. No one said much until they sat down. And even then, it was only Jasper who spoke freely about the hawk he'd seen the day before, the way the river was running fast with meltwater, how he thought he might trap rabbits if he set lines near the aspen grove. Vale nodded, offered a few words here and there, listened more than he spoke. Verity watched that quietness settle over him like a second skin, and somewhere in her chest, the ache of yesterday shifted just slightly. After breakfast, Vale stood and wiped his hands on his trousers. "I need to ride into town," he said. "Mills got a part for the plow, and I promised the blacksmith I'd bring back that broken yoke." Verity hesitated. "Do you want me to stay here with Jasper?" Vale glanced toward the boy, then back at her. "You're not beholden." "But I'd appreciate it," she nodded. "Of course." When the door closed behind him, Jasper looked up from where he was sorting stones on the floor. "You're different from the other women Uncle Vale's known." Verity raised an eyebrow. Is that so? They never stayed long. One was loud. The other left in the middle of the night. She broke a chair on the porch. Verity folded a towel over a rail. "And what do you think of me? You're quiet," he said. "But you don't look scared." She considered that. "What would I be scared of?" Jasper shrugged. "Some folks get nervous out here." Too much sky. She stepped to the window and looked out. The land stretched far and free, golden grasses shifting with the wind, the line of hills in the distance like a long-held breath. "I think the sky's the best part," she said. Later, while Jasper tended to a snare line near the edge of the property, Verity sat on the porch with a book she found in a crate, pages worn, the spine held together with twine. It was a volume of poetry, the kind her mother used to read by lamplight when the crops had failed and her father's hands had gone red with worry. The words steadied her, not because they offered answers, but because they asked the same questions she'd been carrying. Vale returned near sundown, dust on his hat, a canvas sack slung over his shoulder. He walked slower than he had the day before, as if weighing more than just the load he carried. She met him at the gate. "Everything all right?" she asked. He nodded once. "Saw a man in town who used to ride with Vernon. The story's changing." She waited. He wasn't headed into the mountains like he said. He took a job in Green River, drove a freight wagon west. Her mouth went dry. "So he's gone." Vale looked at her straight on. "He never planned to stay." She didn't flinch. "I needed to hear it." They stood in silence as the wind picked up, brushing the tall grass into waves. Vale shifted the sack to his other shoulder. "You could stay if you wanted, longer than a few days." Her brows lifted. "Why? Jasper likes you. You're good with him. I could use the help, and I figure you need time to decide what's next." She studied his face, lined from sun and work, not yet old but marked by years that didn't pass easy. "I'd like that," she said. That night, as the fire burned low and Jasper snored softly in the loft, Verity sat beside the hearth, mending a rip in one of Vale's shirts. He didn't ask her to, but she found it in the pile of laundry and couldn't leave the thread hanging. Vale came in from the barn, smelling of leather and hay. He sat across from her, his eyes on the needle in her hand. "My ma used to mend like that," he said. "Said a stitch done quiet lasts longer." She didn't look up. "She sounds wise." "She was, died birthing my sister." The needle paused. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "It was a long time ago." She tied off the thread and set the shirt aside. "Do you miss her still?" "Some things don't leave." Verity folded her hands in her lap. "My mother passed in the spring. She never trusted Vernon. Said a man who writes pretty words might still leave you with empty cupboards." Vale leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "She sounds wise, too." She was. The fire popped softly. Outside, a coyote called from somewhere beyond the ridge. "You think it's foolish?" she asked. "To have come all this way for a man who never meant to keep his word?" "No," he said. "I think it means you still believe in something worth crossing the plains for." She looked up at that. "And you? I think you're not the only one trying to believe again." She didn't answer, not with words, but she didn't look away either. And in the stillness that followed, something between them settled deeper than kindness. Not yet love, but the ground where it might grow. The first chill breeze of August came in early, carrying the scent of damp sage and the coppery tang of river mud. A storm had rolled through in the night, just enough to soften the hard, packed earth and leave the porch planks slick beneath bare feet. Verity stood at the edge of the step, holding a pail of water she'd drawn from the well before dawn. The sky above the hills was still streaked with lavender, and the cottonwoods along the creek shivered in the wind. Inside, Jasper stirred in the loft, his voice muffled in sleep. Vale was already out by the pens, checking the fence line where the wind had knocked loose a gate hinge. He'd taken the toolbox and a length of rope, his coat flapping behind him like a tired flag. Verity poured the water into the basin by the door, then went to gather the torn linens she'd promised to patch. As her hands worked, her eyes drifted to the small shelf above the hearth where a single daguerreotype sat in a carved wooden frame. A boy and a girl, both fair-haired, stood beside a woman with a plain face and tired eyes. The girl had Vale's jaw. The woman, his quiet steadiness. No man in the picture. When Vale returned, his boots tracked mud and his sleeves were rolled high, arms freckled and damp with sweat. He hung the hammer on the hook by the door and wiped his palms on a cloth. "That gate won't hold through another wind," he said. "I'll ride into Elk Hollow tomorrow, see if I can trade for iron brackets." Verity didn't lift her eyes from the stitch she was guiding. "Do you need someone to go with you?" He leaned his hip against the wall, watching her. "You offering?" "I haven't seen past the river since I got here." "There's a mercantile there," he said, "and a woman who keeps bees might suit you to speak with her. She's got books and a mind of her own." Verity folded the linen and set it aside. "I might like that." He reached for a crate under the table, pulling out a tin marked with faded letters. "I was meaning to ask, that ring you came with, have you thought what you want done with it?" She looked up. "I haven't. You could sell it," he said, "or trade. It's yours to decide." She thought of the weight of it, tucked deep in her satchel, hidden beneath folded chemises and her mother's psalter. "I don't want it anymore," she said, "but I'm not ready to let it go." He nodded once, not pushing. "Let it sit then." She stood, brushing lint from her skirt. "Will Jasper be all right if we're gone the day?" "I'll ask Mrs. Cormack to come by. He knows her well enough." Verity moved to the window, watching a vulture circle high above the ridge. "You ever think of leaving this place?" Vale stepped beside her, his arms crossed. "I used to. After my sister died, I thought maybe I'd go east, but the boy needed someone. And I figured I'd already buried too much to start over somewhere else." "You don't seem like a man who avoids change." "I don't mind change," he said, "but I've seen what happens to folks who run too far from their ghosts. They follow." Verity turned toward him. "You think I was running? I think you were chasing something that felt like hope. That's not the same thing." Her throat tightened, but she held his gaze. "And now, that's for you to answer." She turned back to the window. "I think maybe I'm breathing different here." He didn't speak. Just stood beside her, steady as the ground beneath their boots. By noon the next day they were on the road to Elk Hollow. The mare Vale saddled for Verity was older, soft-eyed and even-tempered. She rode with her back straight, veil tucked under her hat, skirts tied to keep from catching on brush. Vale rode ahead, pointing out landmarks an abandoned trapper's lean-to beneath a twisted pine, a stream where mule deer gathered in the heat. They said little on the ride, but it wasn't uncomfortable. The silence felt companionable, as if words would only clutter the clean line of the trail. Elk Hollow was little more than a wide spot with a livery, a trading post, and a chapel with a bell that hadn't rung in years. The mercantile had a slanted roof and a porch lined with broken crates. Inside, the shelves were stocked with flour sacks, rope coils, and jars of pickled eggs. While Vale bartered with the smith behind the building, Verity wandered the store. She ran her fingers over a bolt of calico, dark blue with scattered stars, then paused before a shelf of books. Most were dog-eared primers, but one caught her eye, a volume of Emerson, spine faded but whole. "He's been sitting there 3 years, a voice said behind her. Verity turned to find a woman with silver-streaked hair and a faded green apron, her hands stained with ink and lavender oil. "I'm Miriam," the woman said. "I see too much and talk too little." "You're not from here." "No," Verity said, setting the book down. "I came looking for someone who wasn't worth finding." Miriam's brow lifted. And found someone else instead, Verity hesitated. I don't know what I've found. Then keep looking, Miriam said. Sometimes the right kind of man's not the one who calls you from across a state, but the one who shows up every day and never once asks you to be less than what you are. Vale returned not long after, rope looped over his shoulder. He glanced at Verity, then at the book in her hands. You want it, she nodded. He paid without comment. They rode home in the hush of dusk, the land cast in copper and violet. At the creek crossing, Vale reached down to steady her reins. His hand lingered a moment longer than needed. Back at the cabin, Jasper was asleep beneath a blanket of Mrs. Cormack's making. The fire had burned low, but the room held a gentle warmth. Verity set the Emerson on the shelf beside the daguerreotype and turned to Vale. Thank you, she said. For what? For letting me stay. For not asking anything of me. He met her eyes. You don't owe me anything. I know, she said, but I think I'd still like to give something back. He didn't move forward, he didn't reach for her, but his voice was low and certain. Then stay. She stepped closer. I think I will. The first frost came earlier than expected. It laced the grass in silver and turned the morning air sharp enough to bite skin. Verity stood at the edge of the garden, the hem of her skirt brushing brittle stalks of once blooming hollyhocks. Jasper had helped her cover the last of the beans the evening before, and now the rows lay quiet, the soil stiff and pale in the slant of dawn. The cabin behind her held the sounds of stirring Vale moving about, the creak of the stove door, a low cough as he stoked the fire. She stayed outside a moment longer, letting the cold settle into her bones. It made her feel alert, clean. Like the air had scrubbed away whatever still clung to her from the life she had left behind. Inside, she found Vale at the table, carving a wedge of dried apple into smaller pieces while Jasper measured oats into the heavy pot. The boy had outgrown 2 shirts since she arrived, his arms now lanky and his voice beginning to shift. He greeted her with a glance and a nod, too focused on his scooping to speak. Vale looked up. Frost took the lower edge of the pasture. Might be we bring the goats in early this year. Verity hung her shawl on the peg. Do you want help moving the fencing? Thinking to patch the shed first. One of the joists cracked from last winter's weight. If you've a steadier hand than mine, I could use it. You know I do. Jasper poured the oats. She's better with a hammer than half the men in town. Vale didn't argue. They spent the morning beneath a pale sky, the sun slow to climb and weaker than it had been even a week ago. The shed leaned slightly east, the way old structures did when the land shifted beneath them, but it held. Verity steadied the crossbeam while Vale braced it with a new length of pine. He worked in rhythm, strike, pause, adjust, strike again, his focus unbroken. When the final nail was set, she stepped back, brushing sawdust from her palms. Not bad, she said. He looked at the shed, then at her. You ever think of staying through winter? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes went to the ridge, where the deer trails had begun to fade into shadowed gullies, then back to the cabin, where smoke drifted from the chimney like a promise of something waiting. I've thought about it, she said. That night, she found Vale on the porch, a tin cup between his hands, the stars thick above them and the wind just beginning to rise. She stepped out with her own cup and sat beside him, her shoulder close to his but not touching. I used to think I needed a man who'd speak like the letters he sent, she said. Turns out words don't hold up near as well as actions. Vale didn't look at her, but his jaw shifted slightly. I never wrote much, couldn't say things the way I wanted. You don't need to. You've told me more by fixing a roof and handing me a bucket than Vernon ever did on paper. The wind picked up, brushing her hair loose from its braid. She didn't tuck it back. I saw a preacher in town, he said after a pause. He asked if I'd be coming to Sunday meetings again. I told him I had someone I might bring if she was willing. She turned her head. Are you asking? I am. Her voice was quiet. Then I'll say yes. The cup warmed her hands, but it was the feeling beneath her ribs that made her breathe deeper than she had in months. He didn't reach for her, didn't press, but she felt the shift between them like a door being opened. Later, under quilts stitched long before either of them had come to this place, she lay awake for a moment, listening to the wind whistle low outside. Then she rose, bare feet quiet on the floor, and opened the satchel tucked beneath the cot. The ring still lay there, its gold dulled by time and dust. She carried it outside, past the garden and the shed, to the creek that ran behind the rise. The moon lit the water. She stood on the bank a long time before she let the ring fall. It struck a stone, then vanished. When she returned, Vale was still on the porch, arms crossed against the cold. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "I am now." He didn't ask what she had done. He didn't need to. She stepped beside him, and this time when her shoulder touched his, she didn't move away. He let out a breath, slow and steady, and the silence between them held nothing uncertain. They stood like that until the clouds began to drift west, and the first hint of dawn turned the edge of the sky the color of a worn quilt, soft, warm, and entirely theirs. By late September, the hills behind the cabin had begun to rust with color: burnt ochre, brittle gold, the last of the summer green fading into memory. Verity stood at the loom Vale's sister had left behind, her hands moving slow and sure through the warp threads. The wool was coarse and uneven, dyed with onion skin and walnut husk, but the pattern was clean and the rhythm steadied her in a way nothing else did. Kettle whistled from the hearth. She tied off the thread and stepped away, lifting the heavy iron with a cloth and pouring water into the chipped basin. She'd begun the blanket for Jasper's bed, but already she knew she'd make another for Vale. The morning had passed without hurry. Jasper had ridden out with a neighbor to help gather firewood, his boots wrapped in oilcloth and a half loaf of bread in his satchel. He'd waved once from the trail, his face half hidden by the collar of his coat. Verity had packed the bread herself, slipping a folded square of wax paper beside it with a few dried cherries tucked inside. When Vale entered, his coat was unbuttoned, and his boots left a trail of dust across the threshold. "I checked the traps down by the creek," he said, hanging his hat. "Caught a rabbit, might be enough for stew." She turned from the hearth. "Your hands are raw." Wire snapped back on me. "Nothing deep." She crossed the room, pulled a tin from the shelf, and opened it. The salve inside smelled of pine pitch and lard. Without asking, she took his hand and worked the ointment into the scrape across his knuckles. He didn't pull away. When she was done, she looked up. "You always fix things yourself, most times. You don't have to anymore." He didn't speak right away. Then, quiet and careful, "I know." That evening, after the stew had gone cold in the pot, and Jasper returned with wind-chapped cheeks and a bundle of kindling, Vale asked her to come with him to the barn. She followed without question, lantern swinging from her hand, the light catching on the frost that had begun to cling to the edges of the woodpile. Inside, the horses shuffled in their stalls. The smell of hay and old earth wrapped around them. Vale leaned against the wall, watching her. "I've been thinking," he said. "You've made a place here, not just in the cabin, in every corner of it." She set the lantern down. "It's a good place to be. I never thought I'd want more than what I had. I figured raising Jasper, keeping the land steady, that'd be enough. But I want more now." She stepped closer. "I want you," he said. "Not for a season, not for what you do, just for who you are." Her voice came low. "And I want you, Vale Preston, for the same reason." He reached for her then, and she went to him without pause. His arms wrapped around her with the kind of certainty that didn't ask questions. She pressed her face to his chest, and for a long moment neither of them moved. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "Yes," she said, before his breath had even settled. They married 1 week later, on a Sunday morning as the sun broke through the thinning clouds. The preacher stood beneath the cottonwood near the edge of the field, coat buttoned to his throat, Bible held with reverence. Jasper stood to one side, his boots polished and hair combed, a sprig of sage tucked in his collar. Vale wore a clean shirt and his father's watch, and Verity wore a dress she'd sewn from the calico they'd bought in Elk Hollow. She carried a bundle of dried yarrow tied with a strip of wool from the loom. The wind caught her veil as they said their vows, but she didn't reach for it. She only looked at Vale and he looked at her, and in that moment the past no longer pressed against her chest. They exchanged rings Jasper had helped carve from polished bone, and when the preacher said the final words, Vale didn't hesitate. He pulled her close and kissed her soft and sure, like he'd been waiting his whole life to be certain of something. A few neighbors came after Mrs. Cormac brought cider, and the woman with the beehives, Miriam, carried in a jar of honey wrapped in muslin. They sat on stumps and crates, shared bread and laughter, and when the sun began to dip, Jasper played a fiddle the blacksmith had lent him for the day. It didn't matter that he missed half the notes. Verity danced with Vale in the patch of flattened grass behind the barn, her hand in his, her eyes bright. That night, after the guests had gone and the hearth glowed low, Vale led her to the bedroom at the back of the cabin. He had built a bed frame from pine, sturdy and smooth, with quilts layered thick. They undressed without hurry, and when they lay beside each other, it was not with shyness, but with a quiet reverence. He touched her like she was something long hoped for, and she gave herself to him without fear. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to come morning. She woke with her head on his chest and the sound of snow beginning to fall outside. It dusted the windowsills, soft and white, and the sky beyond was pale with promise. In the weeks that followed, the routine settled into something whole. Verity taught Jasper how to write in cursive, and Vale fixed the west fence. They dried apples together, sang hymns on Sundays, and built a cradle from leftover cedar for the child they both hoped might come. Jasper, too, changed. He started calling her Aunt Verity without being asked. He sat closer when she read, brought her feathers and stones he found, and once, when he thought no one was looking, he tucked his old blanket into the cradle she had lined with wool. That winter was long, but it did not feel heavy. They filled it with small joys, warm bread, shared glances, stories told by firelight. And in every corner of the cabin, in every creak of the floor and whisper of wind, there was peace. When spring came, the first green shoots pushed through the soil near the porch where Verity had planted onions. Vale stood behind her, arms wrapped around her waist, and she leaned back into him. "You ever think about what your life might have been?" he asked. "If you hadn't come here." She turned her head. "I don't." "Why not?" "Because I wouldn't trade this, not for anything." He kissed her temple and she closed her eyes. They stayed like that a while, man and woman, husband and wife, two people who had weathered loss and found in each other something stronger than what they'd left behind. Not just comfort, but home, and they never had need to leave it again.